Trump has sentenced NATO to death, and Europe barely noticed. While fuel prices explode, leaders sip champagne, and the real story stays hidden. Right now, Germans are paying over €2 for a litre of fuel, but Ursula von der Leyen is on the other side of the world, toasting in Australia. European leaders stand frozen, their silence echoing louder than any speech. And the media? They're doing an impressive job of downplaying the scale of this crisis. But what if the silence isn't strength? What if it's a sign of something far more dangerous? Here's what they're not telling you. In just the past few weeks, the world watched as Iran, in retaliation for Western strikes, blocked the Strait of Hormuz, shutting off the passage for 20% of the world's oil. Not just empty threats, but real tankers stopped dead, supplies cut, oil prices rocketing past $100 a barrel. Gas on European markets soared 65% in just 1 week. At German gas stations, €2 per litre became the new normal, and experts warn a full-on shortage, not just high prices, could hit Europe as early as next month. Yet when Trump called on his allies to help break the blockade, European leaders shrugged it off. Germany's defense minister coolly declared, "This isn't our war." Other leaders hid behind diplomatic language, insisting NATO is a defensive alliance, not an intervention force. No one wants to act. No one wants to take responsibility. And all the while, European industry suffocates. Families feel the squeeze, and the continent's strategic autonomy slips away. So is this diplomatic restraint, or is it pure paralysis? If Europe keeps ignoring these warnings, the price won't just be at the pump. It'll be political autonomy, economic security, and public trust, all circling the drain. To understand how things reached this point, let's rewind a few weeks. The real crisis began not with words, but with oil tankers standing still, and prices blowing past $100 a barrel. On February 28th, everything changed. After a US-Israeli strike on Iran, Tehran slammed the door shut on the Strait of Hormuz. Instantly, 20% of the world's oil supply was trapped. Prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, across Europe, the numbers on every pump shot up daily. Natural gas futures in Europe surged 65% in just 1 week. It wasn't just a hit to wallets. Suddenly, global giants like Shell weren't just warning about higher costs, they were openly talking about fuel shortages. Not enough to go around, period. European leaders rushed to reassure the public, but behind the scenes, there was panic. The German energy minister, Sven Reike, made a rare admission. Abandoning nuclear power was a huge mistake. For years, energy security had been taken for granted. Now, it was clear Europe was frighteningly exposed, and there wasn't a plan. Meanwhile, ordinary people faced more than just record-high prices. They faced the possibility of actual physical shortages. Factories in Bavaria and Lombardy went idle as diesel ran out. City buses in Spain were cut. Households in France and Poland rationed heating, bracing for blackouts. But while the public felt the pain, European leaders seemed trapped in endless debates about principles and image. And as the crisis spiraled, it was former President Trump who broke the silence, blasting out in all caps, "NATO allies are cowards, afraid of everything. Without the US, the alliance is a paper tiger. They complain about oil prices but won't lift a finger to unblock the strait. We'll remember this." Harsh, undiplomatic, but crucially, no one in Europe could deny the underlying truth. As this chaos unfolded, Trump called on NATO allies for support. But what did Europe do? When asked for help, Europe answers with empty words, not action, while its own industries choke. At the height of the crisis, President Trump bluntly called on NATO allies to help break the Iranian blockade of the Hormuz Strait. "It's Europe's oil," he argued, "Europe's problem too." But what did he get in response? Germany's defense minister declared, "This isn't our war." European leaders lined up to repeat the same refrain. NATO is a defensive alliance. We won't intervene. The message couldn't be clearer. When push comes to shove, Europe prefers debates and declarations over decisive action. While fuel prices skyrocket and factories face shutdowns, European governments are busy denouncing the blockade, holding press conferences, and blaming everyone but themselves. But when it comes to real solutions, sending ships, securing supply lines, or even just speaking with a united voice, they do nothing. Trump, never one for subtlety, blasted NATO as a paper tiger, accusing European allies of cowardice and free-riding on American power. His outburst echoed across the Atlantic, fueling American frustration at carrying the Western alliance while Europe dithers. This fracture in Western unity isn't just a diplomatic embarrassment. It exposes the harsh truth of Europe's dependency. All the talk of values, of strategic autonomy, falls apart when Europe can't keep the lights on without outside help. Citizens watch their bills soar and their leaders waffle, powerless to challenge the new global reality. Faith in mutual defense, the very foundation of NATO, is shaken. If Europe won't act even to protect its own lifelines, what does that say about the alliance? But the hypocrisy doesn't end there. To really grasp Europe's predicament, just look at its own energy policies and the uncomfortable truths its leaders won't say out loud. Here's the real exposure. European leaders' words just don't match their deeds, and the cost is falling on ordinary people. Take Germany, for example. As Germans face record-high fuel prices, Chancellor Merkel is busy criticizing Washington's decision to temporarily relax sanctions on Russian oil. The irony? This move could actually ease some of the pain at the pump for German citizens. But instead of seizing the opportunity, Berlin clings to its tough-on-Russia rhetoric, even as its own people pay more for heating and driving every single day. And it's not just Germany. Ursula von der Leyen stands in Brussels and promises Europe will never buy Russian gas, not even during blackouts. Yet, behind the scenes, Russian LNG is quietly flowing into European ports. Officially, it's forbidden. Unofficially, it's business as usual. The disconnect between public statements and private actions has never been wider. Then there's Belgium. The Prime Minister openly calls for a return to normal relations with Russia, something that, not long ago, would have been political suicide. Now, it's almost a silent consensus, whispered in the corridors of power, as leaders realize that principles alone won't heat homes or keep factories running. Those who dare speak this uncomfortable truth risk public backlash and professional isolation. Meanwhile, those who quietly go along with the status quo are rewarded with political safety. All the while, the United States is making the most of Europe's indecision. American LNG tankers cross the Atlantic, but those shipments now come with strings attached. Trade concessions, regulatory changes. Europe has simply swapped dependence on Russian pipelines for dependence on American tankers. The only difference? U.S. gas is more expensive, arrives by ship through vulnerable sea routes, and can be cut off or leveraged for political gain at any moment. Europe ran from one dependency straight into the arms of another. Only this time, the price is even higher. If Europe continues this way, prioritizing appearances over action, ideals over practical needs, it risks far more than just another spike in energy bills. Strategic autonomy slips away. Credibility erodes. In the New World Order, Europe is in danger of becoming little more than a pawn, moved at the whim of more decisive powers. Meanwhile, on the global stage, Iran, Russia, China, and the US are all making bold moves. But as they act, Europe stands still, frozen, indecisive, and increasingly irrelevant. The most ironic twist? The very country Europe tried so hard to punish, Russia, has come out as one of the biggest winners. While European leaders doubled down on sanctions and tough talk, Russia quietly raked in an extra €6 billion in just 3 weeks of the Iran crisis. Oil prices soared, demand for alternative suppliers exploded, and, with Europe paralyzed, Moscow found itself cashing in on a conflict it had no direct part in. The sanctions that were meant to squeeze Russia's economy ended up backfiring spectacularly. But not a single top official in Brussels is willing to admit it. Because admitting it would mean facing the uncomfortable truth. 4 years of strategy were fundamentally misguided. And if there's one thing European elites hate, it's admitting mistakes. Doubling down is a lot more comfortable. Meanwhile, Iran has performed its own act of geopolitical judo. The blockade of the Hormuz Strait, instead of triggering a forceful response, has simply turned into a kind of floating customs toll. Every shipment that passes pays the price, and Tehran pockets the cash. China and India, sidestepping Western sanctions, negotiate energy deals directly with Iran, giving Tehran a financial lifeline and a seat at the table it was supposedly locked out of. Across the Atlantic, the crisis is shaking the very foundations of the transatlantic alliance. Former President Trump, never one to mince words, has started openly floating ways to take the US out of NATO. Legally, it's a gray zone, but even the possibility is enough to send shivers through European capitals. The heart of NATO, Article 5, the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all, only works if everyone believes in it. After Europe refused to support the US in its most significant military conflict in decades, that trust is now all but shattered. Trump's latest message is as blunt as ever. Never forget this moment. It's not just a burst of emotion. It's a verdict on an alliance where some fight and others just debate values. And what about the leaders at home? Even when someone dares to break the silence, the backlash is immediate. Germany's usually cautious president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, called the war a political cancer. The first such statement from a German leader at this level. He was instantly rebuked by his own party and ignored by the chancellor, who preferred silence to facing the truth in public. This golden, cowardly, very European silence, as one commentator put it, has become the default. The lesson here couldn't be clearer or more urgent. Europe's fear of decisive action, its obsession with moral consistency, and its unwillingness to confront the real costs of its choices have left it dangerously exposed. If nothing changes, Europe could permanently lose not just energy security and economic competitiveness, but its global influence and, ultimately, the well-being of its own citizens. So where does this leave Europe? And what must change before it's too late? Europe's golden silence isn't strategy, it's surrender. While leaders cling to the comfort of lofty speeches and green promises, the reality on the ground is harsher than ever. Fuel prices are breaking records in Dusseldorf. Moscow profits from a crisis it didn't cause, and America's patience, along with its support, is running thin. Every day Europe doubles down on past mistakes, afraid to admit its own strategy has failed. And what's left? No cheap gas, no credible military, no real foreign policy, just empty words and a mounting sense of helplessness. If nothing changes, Europe's future will be defined by dependence and irrelevance, while ordinary people pay the price. The real danger isn't some distant enemy, but leaders who refuse to act, hiding behind principles as the world changes around them. Silence isn't neutral. It's a choice, and it's costing Europe dearly. Now, more than ever, it's up to us to demand honesty and action before the next crisis comes knocking.